Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where you'll find information on what's going on the North Fork of Long Island. We'll be focusing on issues and opportunities going on in the community, as well as people and stories from the present and the past. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 56, our guest today is Jeremy Garretson, who is a photographer in the area, and we delve into his life story. We explore his ancestry and childhood experiences growing up in New York City. Jeremy shares his memories from his school days and reveals how he discovered his passion for photography. We also talk about his career as a licensed sea captain and what drew him to the North Fork. Jeremy recounts his college years and his early fascination with abandoned buildings, which he loved to explore and photograph. We discuss his current work as a freelance photographer and the inception of the Faces of Greenport Project. And lastly, Jeremy shares his hopes for the future of the North Fork. So I hope you enjoy episode 56 with Jeremy Garretson. This episode was recorded May 17th, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So to start off, could you give us a brief introduction, kind of where you were born and raised?
Yeah, my name's Jeremy Garretson. I was born in Manhasset, Long Island, and up until I was about 18 to 20, I kind of lived in Manhattan, and then by the time I was 20, I basically loved it out here so much that my parents had a house in Orient, and I just kind of transitioned out of the city and made this my home. I was like, I don't want to look back. You grew up too fast in the city, and I like the slower pace here. By the time I was 18, I felt like I had done stuff that kids who are like in their 20s should be doing. So, I definitely like the slower pace here. But yeah. Awesome.
And now, in terms of your ancestry, how far back can you go on your mother's or father's side?
Yeah, so my mom and dad both live out here. They're in Peconic Landing. And my mom's side, she's a British immigrant, and she moved over to Canada when she was 9 and then moved to America. And then my dad's side goes back in the U.S. pretty far back. I don't actually know, but certainly over 150 years at least. But I'm actually adopted, so there's this other side of my family that I'm still kind of discovering. I found my birth mother recently. She's a German immigrant, and she came over here when she was a young girl, and I just found her recently, and we're just starting to connect. I haven't met her in person yet, but it's been exciting. There's always been a part of me that I've never seen myself in another person physically, and when I found her, her name, and I hopped on Facebook, and I saw her face for the first time, it was this like profound moment that unlike anything I had experienced before. I didn't expect it to be just seeing a photo of somebody that had features similar to me, like how profound that would be. It's been a path, a learning path that is difficult. It's emotional, but I also am pretty comfortable talking about it. It's my parents always raised me. actual parents. They've always raised me knowing it, that I was adopted, and being very supportive and loving. And yeah, I mean,
When did you first find out?
they always, like, I don't remember. There was never a point where they like sat me down like, you're adopted. They just always wanted me to know. So I don't actually, as far back as I can remember, I've always known that I was adopted. Whether I understood it when I was younger is another thing. There was, in 7th grade, I had this English teacher who, to this day, if I ever run into him, I'm going to have some coarse words with him. But he made the students write a paper about the day they were born. And, you know, in 7th grade, you're going through this very awkward stage of figuring out who you are. And I was, you know, I approached him after and told him, like, look, I'm adopted. I'm not sure if I can really do this paper. And he insisted that I do it. And my mom, who was not one of those mothers who like would call the school and complain if their kid did something, she called and, you know, advocated for me. But at the end of the day, I had to do the paper, and my parents felt as if they were kind of, I felt, and my parents felt like that they were kind of, we were being forced to dig into this, even though I might not have been ready at the time. And, you know, I did write the paper. I think I put my heart into it. I remember crying, like, writing it. It was really difficult, and I got like a B minus, I think, on it. I was never an A student, but man, I felt like the effort I put into that paper, I deserved an A. And yeah, so that English teacher, yeah, Mr. Derringer, if you're listening.
Yeah. No, that's it's interesting. So you were in Manhasset?
I was born in Manhasset, but I was adopted like a month and a half after I was born. So my parents lived on 96, 97th on the west side. And I mean, so yeah, I don't remember being adopted or any of that, you know. I was a baby. So, but you know, my parents gave me a great life. I'm an only child, and I'm adopted, which makes me realize that they really wanted me. You know, there was no like accident there.
Yeah.
You know, and they gave me everything I could ask for. I definitely was spoiled.
Yeah. And then for your parents and growing up in New York City, what did your parents do for a living?
My dad was an architect. He worked for a large firm for many years, and then at a certain point, they I don't remember exactly what happened, but they laid a bunch of people off, and he was one of them. And I was in 2nd grade, and at that point, he kind of transitioned to working from home and starting his own practice. And I didn't realize just like how unique that was, because you know, in the 80s and 90s, most kids had their mom at home or a babysitter or were latchkey. I was a bit of a latchkey kid, but my dad worked from home, so my dad kind of filled those, you know, at the time I think we called them Mr. Mom. You know, there was a movie that came out about dad being like the at-home mom. You know, he was hardworking and everything, but I came home and it was my dad who would greet me. He was the first dad on the PTA at the time. And yeah, I consider myself very lucky that I had my father at home. My mom was the one who, she worked for a government organization that helped manufacturing companies grow and improve. And, you know, she was the one who brought home the steady paycheck, and my dad was the one who, you know, you design a building, and like me, yeah, my wife has a steady job. I'm the one, a freelance photographer, so you feast or famine kind of thing.
Yes.
So yeah.
And so how long did you live up on the upper, that was the upper
West Side.
Yeah.
Oh man, my parents sold the house, I want to say the apartment, probably in the mid 2000s. And yeah, I mean, I spent, like I said, 18 to 20 years of my life like there. And my mother, I was at camp one summer. Every summer we would go sailing. We'd charter a boat for like a week or two at the end of the summer and hop around New England and whatnot. And my mom did a thing called Women's Ship, and it was it used to operate somewhere out of here, and it was a women-run boat. They take women, you pay them, they take you on board, and they teach you how to sail for like a week or two. And they pulled into Orient Harbor, and my mom came ashore and walked down Village Lane, and she was like, "This is it. This is, you know, this is the place." And we rented a house there next summer, and maybe it was 2 summers, and very shortly after, you know, my parents bought a small house on Village Lane, and at that point I was basically out here as much as I could be. I really didn't spend much time in the city anymore.
And that was kind of, you were in your 20s?
Yeah.
But what about just in terms of your childhood growing up in the city? How was that experience, and in terms of activities maybe on the weekend or after school, what kind of things would you do in the area?
You know, I played sports. Hockey was my big thing for a while. But you know, like I said, I grew up too fast in the city, I feel like. And there's everything you can imagine there when you're a kid. You know, opportunities. You have freedom to take public transportation. I mean, I was 9 years old, 10 years old, getting on buses by myself. Whereas I know that kids out here, parents out here, I think would be like scared to let their, you know, 10-year-old take a bus downtown, but in the city, that you know, that's part of it. You don't get on I didn't get on a school bus to go to school. I got on public transportation, and so yeah, I had a lot of freedom, and I had great friends in the city. But yeah.
And what about for school in the city? You mentioned the one writing experience, but in terms of just your overall experience, and what about in terms of subject matter, what did you kind of gravitate towards?
So I went to an all-boys school. My parents invested heavily in my education. That was a real priority for them, and they worked hard to, you know, pay for it. And I'm very grateful for that. So I went to a school called Browning. Browning School for Boys. And, you know, formal dress code type school. I was not an A student. I always struggled in school. I did find a lot of solace in art, and I had a really great art teacher. And I wish I could thank her, because she really is probably the reason I graduated. I was not doing well my final years, and the school held like a benefit to raise money, and every year they asked a kid I had 22 kids in my grade, very small school, and they asked one kid to do an art piece that gets auctioned off at the benefit, and my art teacher tapped me for that, and I painted this, like, it was, the benefit theme was Tuscany. I don't know why, but so I had to paint like a Tuscan landscape, and I did it. I remember working really hard on it, and it went to auction for the benefit, and it like blew the records away. It auctioned for $5,000, which was like, as a kid, was like, what? If somebody spent $5,000 on my artwork, granted I didn't get any of that, but it was a really cool experience. And so that I graduated like a bunch of art credits and awards and stuff. But the other big part of my life was boating and sailing, and basically not long after high school, I went to get my captain's license, and I really wanted to work on boats, and sailing especially was a big part of it. And so I thought at that point, like, you know, I didn't think I could make a living as an artist. I didn't like the idea of being a struggling artist. I liked the idea of being outside and nature, all that stuff. So boating seemed like the course, and I pursued that for 10 years. I had my captain's license, and I worked on sailboats on the Hudson River for a little bit. I worked for Seatow, Eastern Long Island. I drove the launch at Shelter Island Yacht Club for 4 summers. It was a great job. Like being outside all summer long on a boat is perfect. And so I mean, I did take I did do college for a while. Like I said, school was not my strong suit. I went to Stony Brook and I took digital art, and that kind of led me down a different path. I was very intrigued by art at that point. My grandmother was an artist. That's all she ever did was paint and needlepoint and all sorts of stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I always loved art, but boating I thought was like the choice, what I was going to end up doing the rest of my life. I think it even said that in my yearbook, like, where would you be in 20 years, and captaining some boat or something.
Well, in high school, you were interested in the arts already at that time, but coming out of high school, you wanted to do boating and sailing.
Yeah, I just didn't like the idea or the uncertainty that art world brought, or at least the way my school was a prep school, right? It wasn't preparing boys to be artists. It wasn't preparing boys to be captains and work on boats. It was preparing boys to be lawyers and doctors and traders and all that stuff where you make lots and lots of money. Money was not like my goal. It was, enjoying what I do was more important. I never wanted to be in a cubicle or any of that. And
then did you say why your parents moved out to the North Fork?
Well, they stumbled upon it as kind of a summer weekend house, and I kind of viewed it at the time, maybe subconsciously, maybe consciously, but as an opportunity to like live on my own. So they would be in the city 5 days a week, and I would be out here. And your early 20s, that extra freedom, it was worth a lot. So eventually they retired, and they sold the apartment in the city and got a much, much smaller one, and started spending more time out here. And then eventually they sold that apartment, and they're been out here full time since. And
what did you think of the North Fork when you initially came out for the first time?
When I was really young, we had family that had a house on Nantucket, and like I said, we also would charter a boat and sometimes go to Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket. And I loved Nantucket as a kid, when I was like 10, 8, whatever. But I even at that age, I remember seeing it becoming very popular and getting like just huge influx of tourism, and almost becoming a place that was like unobtainable for my family to visit. And so when I came out to the North Fork for the first time, granted it's not like Nantucket, but I saw a lot of the similarities and things that drew me to where I summered when I was really young. So I loved it out here. I loved the water. I loved the boats. I think like a lot of my friends that I went to school with had houses in the Hamptons, and I had like visited them, and it wasn't for me. And then I remember coming out here and just being like, oh, they have a huge boating community out here. And the Hamptons is known for their beaches, I say, and North Fork's known for their boating, I think, or more so.
Yeah. And that initial change, because you mentioned growing up in the city, You said things went by fast, or your childhood, it felt different, but when you came out here, did you feel like it slowed down in some way?
Absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, between the city and the school I went to, it was like a completely different experience than like what I see my kids going through out here, going to Southold. There's so much stuff that from where I'm coming at, I feel like I missed out on. Like prom, for example, for me was multiple schools that really didn't know each other. All girls schools, all boys schools, and nobody had spent much time together, and they're all just thrown into, I think it was at the Waldorf, and it just didn't feel like a prom. But then I see like what my daughter went through here, and I'm like, oh, I didn't have that. Or even the sports out here, my school was in a building. There was a gym on the roof, but there's no soccer fields or track fields and all that. But yeah, I mean, I think in the city, it goes by faster, partly because you have a lot more freedom as a kid. Like I said, just general freedom. My parents would also come out here when I was young, and I'd stay in the city alone and have my friends over and have parties and get into all sorts of trouble. And yeah, I don't know. I just I really wanted more freedom, and I think that of a different type of freedom though. Like I wanted space, and that's kind of how I ended up out here.
Now, you worked within the sailing and boating. You did that early on, but I mean, you decided to go to Stony Brook later on.
Kind of the same time.
Same time.
Yeah, I did want to finish college, and art seemed like the right thing, even though I still didn't see it as a profession necessarily. But I was really into cinema at the time. When I was young, we had a movie filmed in our apartment. I don't know how it happened, but Mickey Blue Eyes. It's a Hugh Grant, James Caan movie.
Yeah.
And I guess the location scout was going around the Upper West Side looking for apartments that faced the park, that they wanted it to look like Fifth Avenue. But Fifth Avenue was too expensive, so they went to the West Side and Central Park West. And somehow they chose our apartment, and the first week they took everything out. They painted the walls, brought their furniture in, and then they shot for one day. And I remember my parents never let me skip school. Like, I had to be on my deathbed to skip. And I asked them, I was like, look, I really want to see them film this movie. And so they let me stay at home, and I just, it was like watching magic, like watching the cameras, the dollies, just the team effort that went into making a shot was mind-blowing when I was like, I think I was probably 15. And
even for a movie like a romantic
a rom-com, yeah. But they showed up at like 3 a.m. and I think they didn't leave the house until midnight that night. I mean, it was a full day of shooting, and then for the next week they took all their stuff out and brought our furniture back, and that actually led to a Law and Order episode getting shot in our house as well. And that planted a seed at a young age, like, okay, I think cinema might be a path, and that's why I when I went to Stony Brook, I was taking digital art because I was like thinking, okay, maybe I could be an editor, maybe, I wasn't sure, but I was definitely interested. But at the same time, like the captain's license working on boats seems like a much more sure thing as far as like employment, and yeah.
But at Stony Brook, did you get to make, say, video art or more film-based stuff, or were you trying a lot of different things within that area, and even within photography?
Yeah, I mean, you had all the art prerequisites, painting and sketching and figure drawing. And while I felt like that painting I did like was a little ego boost, I didn't see myself as a very good painter. So I was doing all those other arts while I was there. But I also was doing some editing and like Premiere Pro and Photoshop classes and stuff like that, and graphic design. And there were some video projects in there. Obviously, Stony Brook isn't known as like a movie making school, but they do have a good arts program. And that kind of led, I took photography, and I didn't like it at first. Maybe it was the professor, I don't know. And I met somebody in that class who was into urban exploring, or urbex. I don't know if it's still called that, but we had a photography project. I forget what it was, but he told me to come along with him, and we went into Pilgrim State Psychiatric Center up in the center of Long Island, and then we went to Kings Park, which it's like this famous abandoned psychiatric ward. Both of them are Pilgrim State and Kings Park, and we snuck in there, and the decay and the falling apart of the place. It was a huge active hospital, and then in 1997, 98, across the country, there was the deinstitutionalization. That's a mouthful, but that happened, and basically all these psych wards got shut down because they were, a lot of them were doing unethical practices. But when they got shut down, all the stuff, the papers, the chairs, the beds, the office supplies, the x-ray machines were just left there. And it's like, a busy hospital one day, and then the next day it's just empty. I mean, not empty, but empty of people. And, and very quickly nature takes its course and starts claiming the place back. And, within 15 years, there's moss growing everywhere, trees growing out of the floor. It's obviously a very dangerous place. It was 100% illegal. You're not meant to be in there, but documenting it. And so that was the photography project, I brought the 35 millimeter film camera in there and started taking pictures, and it all of a sudden I was hooked. I thought this was the most incredible thing. I don't think I was very good at it, but I was like, okay, so I like photography as long as I'm pointing my camera to something I like, or interests me. And so then for the next couple of years, I started going into all sorts of abandoned buildings. There's one on the East River called North Brothers Island, and it's where Typhoid Mary, who was famous for being credited for giving, I don't know how many people, but thousands of people potentially typhoid in the early 1900s. And it's right next to Rikers Island, and me and a buddy left the North Fork with kayaks on our roof, drove to the city, to Randall's Island, launched our kayaks, and paddled out to the island. The East River has really strong currents, and there's Coast Guard and police there because of Rikers. And we're paddling, and we beeline it to the island. And once you're on this island, because it's a lot of these abandoned places get graffiti and vandalism. This place was untouched, and it was absolutely incredible. Unfortunately, I lost all the photos because of a hard drive failure. But you're right next to the busiest city in the world, and you're on this little island that's completely abandoned, and you're all alone. And I fell hard into urban exploring.
Was there some adrenaline rush?
Absolutely.
When and planning it, getting there, and then eventually making your way through. I've seen some photos like that, even in Detroit, being a big area for that. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing, but it's something that can be addicting. It's like, let me see what the next spot I can go to. But was that area, what was the name of the island?
North Brothers Island.
Do you know when that area was abandoned, that building?
That was a lot earlier than the 97, 98 deinstitutionalization. God, I got that word right twice. I want to say it was like 1940s or 30s or something. It closed down a long time ago. But, you know, they had like a theater on the island that like all the seats are there, just collapsed. You know, a lot of these buildings are extremely unsafe. Actually, Liz Galuli and I did some urban exploring. You know who Liz is?
Yes.
Yeah. I was always trying to rope people in to come with me because you didn't want to go in by yourself, mainly for safety if something happens. But we went to a factory on the Hudson River, and we went exploring. And Mary Latham is another person who went with me. Yeah, there's a bunch of people out here I would drag to these places. But I got to a point. I almost got arrested once, and I managed to talk myself out of it, thank God. But there was another incident where we were in Kings Park and photographing the morgue, and a cop, I guess, pulled in to have his lunch, like right outside of the morgue, and he stayed there for like 3 hours, and we were just trapped in we weren't trapped, but like we couldn't leave the morgue, and it was just spending 3 hours in a morgue was a little longer than I wanted under those circumstances. But yeah, I definitely hit a point where I was like, okay, this is not. I'm getting too old to be getting into trouble like this.
To keep risking this type of.
But it was a huge community. I don't know who's familiar with Flickr, but the website, that Flickr used to be huge in the photography community, and it was like good, wholesome social media, not like what Instagram, any of that is. Like, you could share a photo of some abandoned building, and then you'd meet somebody would comment on it, and all of a sudden you and that person are off to explore some location they had found. And it was just a really tight-knit community. And I did like that part of it. You don't find that on social media these days.
No. Were there any interesting places out here that were abandoned at the time? Because, well, I know even in Greenport in the 90s and 80s, I think there was a lot more, especially with some of the oyster places and abandoned, but that they built condos there. But were there any stories out here?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff out here wasn't the most interesting. I mean, the oyster factory, the statute of limitations has passed on all of this stuff. So, but yeah, the oyster factory was like obviously one, but it really wasn't that interesting. I mean, there's like a room or two in there that I think I got photos of, but it's really just a big empty shell of a building, and it's very unsafe. I mean, a piece of roof fell like while I was there. Just wind. You know, there's the duck farm up in Aquabog, Riverhead, the abandoned part of the duck farm. And there's some like, what do you call it? The workers' camp buildings where the farm laborers would be. And yeah, there's
the one in Cutchogue burned down in the 2000s.
Yeah, there was a school over in Cutchogue as well on like the North Road. I mean, Oregon Road. I never went in there because it was clearly private property. But yeah, I mean, there's some places. You know, the shipyard's not abandoned in Greenport, but it's certainly photogenic and visually interesting. So I definitely spent some time going around there with permission. The more local it was, the more I wanted to get permission because it's my own backyard.
It can be tougher than say those other locations.
I wanted to get on Plum Island for a while. They have the old barracks and stuff that's abandoned. they have a couple buildings there I hear that are abandoned. I've read that are abandoned, but I've never been there. Camp Hero and Montauk, I mean, that's like one of the most famous abandoned places, I feel like. The Radar Tower, and it's like where Stranger Things was based off of. So, there's some out here, but property value is too expensive out here to leave abandoned buildings kicking around.
Yes.
Minus the Oyster Factory. Somebody needs to do something with that building.
Mm-hmm. And so you even started this more while you were at Stony Brook, but what else were you doing after you finished or after you graduated?
So I was... This is like 2006, 2007. I was doing 2008 too. I was doing the urban exploring, and I was also still working on the water and doing all that. And at some point around 2010 or 11, my camera was stolen, and my bag and everything I had, and I kind of just went on a hiatus for a while and just did the boating thing. I decided to go to a trade school in Newport called IRIS. It's an International Yacht Restoration School. And they have a wooden boat program that's very well known. And they also have a composite, like fiberglass carbon fiber boat building program. And I did the composite program, and so I was living there, and photography just faded away for a bit. I couldn't afford a new camera, and to be honest, I like pretty much forgot about it for a while. And so I then went to work for a company that built carbon fiber rigging for the America's Cup boats, and I did R&D there for a bit, and I wasn't loving it though. It was working inside. Like I said earlier, I really liked being outside. I really liked I don't necessarily love having a boss. I like being my own boss. And so that kind of I did that till about 2014, I think. And but you eventually came back to photography. You had opened up a storefront here called Jeremy Garretson. J. Garretson Fine Art.
J. Garretson.
Yeah.
When did that open up?
That opened end of 2018, or I think it was just end of 2018. But so it's kind of a jump.
But in between there, you were kind of still figuring out.
So in 2015, I was kind of in a dark spot. Let's just say that. I was single. I had lost my job. Not in a good headspace. Came into some legal trouble. But I also met my now wife. And she really gets most of the credit here because she stuck with me through this dark spot in my life. And she actually purchased, she saw some of my old photos. I showed her on Flickr, and she kind of insisted that I give this a shot again, and she bought me a camera. I had no money then either. I was not in a great point in my life, but she bought me a camera, and I was working on getting myself better, and I found a lot of solace from just being out in nature and photographing, whatever it was like therapy to me. And so I was 2015, I met her, and she got me a camera then, and as soon as I got the camera back in my hands, it was full throttle. This is it. I don't know why I stopped doing it. So that 2015, I got the camera, and within a year, I was I'm gonna make this into a profession. I'm gonna do this full time, and registered at DBA with Suffolk County, and it was, a very gradual process, learning. And, everybody who starts out in photography is usually surrounded by family and friends saying, "Oh my God, you're so good. You should sell this," or "You should do this full time." And it goes to somebody's ego, and they're like, I'm the most talented photographer. And I'm pretty sure this is most people, because I've heard this from a lot of photographers. The reality is, though, like, I was not that good then, even though I thought I was, and all that. You gotta realize that there's people that are more experienced and better than you, and you gotta be open to learn from them, and not let your friends and parents who know nothing about photography, not let that go to your head.
Yeah. Like you said, showing it to family members, I don't think you get as much of a critique as you do from other people. But no, that's interesting. Because you said earlier on, you're like, I'm never going to try to make a living as an artist. It was kind of like a 360 to start that.
It kind of happened because I was prioritizing my happiness and, like, my mental health, and photography allowed me to do that. Mm-hmm. And I realized that, like, that is more important than making money. At least for me, I know money is really important, and some people strive to make a lot of it. It's not as important for me. Mm-hmm. I want to be comfortable, but I don't need to be rich or any of that. So I prioritized what photography was giving me, which was peace of mind, happiness, all this. Boating now fell to the wayside. I didn't, when you have a captain's license, every 5 years you have to renew it. I decided not to. I felt like when you're on a boat and you have your captain's license, even if you're not the captain, you have, like, responsibilities if something happens. And I just didn't want those anymore. I kind of got burnt out. I worked on boats for so many years, and whether it was building them or operating them, I was just like, I need a break from this. It was a very slow process starting a photography business out here. The friends and family that sit there and tell you you're the best are oftentimes not the ones who are going to hire you or buy art from you. Mm-hmm. I mean, out of all my friends, I have people that are friends now that have purchased art, but they weren't friends before they purchased art. But the people I've been friends with my whole life who said I was amazing, they usually don't buy anything, with the exception of, like, one person I can think of. Yeah. So.
Now, and then over time, did it, in terms of getting to know the community and picking up commissions, or, I mean, even now, are you doing work for the Suffolk Times?
2016, I started doing freelance work for the Suffolk Times, and actually, the first thing I ever did was the North Forker. I think this was, like, the first vacation guide they ever did. They had asked me to photograph the cover photo, and I don't know why they chose me, because I don't love the photo that much, but at the time, it was a long time ago. That was kind of the first job I did for them, and then over the years it's progressed to, I've photographed every maritime with the exception of the one that COVID canceled. Parades all over the North Fork. I felt like I was kind of like the parade guy for a while. And people, like, would recognize me and expect me to be at any of the parades to take pictures. And like I said, it was a really slow process building up this into a profession. But when I started, I was, like, very set on being a landscape photographer only. the other stuff didn't really interest me. I'm an introvert, and I liked the idea of just being out there by yourself in nature and not having to direct a person and tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know, like 4 years ago, 2019 was the main year I had the gallery that you were talking about. And kind of during that period, I did a lot of reflecting on my work. I always will love landscape photography, but I realized over the coming years that like I didn't just want to be known for that. Even though I've done like real estate and architecture and I've done other portraits, I was like, my title is landscape photographer, Mm-hmm. And now it's like completely different. I actually like cringe when somebody says I'm a landscape photographer, because I kind of just view it as more like a documentary photographer. I like documenting things.
Could you talk a little bit more about the process of where you wanted to change from the landscape to doing more a variety of different projects?
Yeah, okay. So I started seeing a lot of my photos that I had taken of places across the North Fork. A lot of times my photos they may be landscape, but they include like a man-made element, a touch of man, as I've heard it referred. So it's not just nature. I find that like a barn or a lighthouse or whatever can oftentimes add to the story of the photo. But I was starting to see that a lot of these barns specifically I had photos of places that were no longer there. They had been destroyed, built over, developed, whatever. And it made me start thinking a little bit more about like what a photograph means historically, and like documenting stuff that is going through change. The North Fork, as we've all seen, is getting developed very quickly. And I was seeing a change, and I wanted to start to capture that through photography. And that kind of spawned an idea. But let me rewind really quick. When I was starting, there was a local photographer named Jake Raj. A lot of people knew him. He lived in the Hamptons, lived in Orient. He was just on the East End. He's published tons of books that I'm sure are in this library about like the national parks and all sorts of stuff. He did one Between Land and Sea, or no, I can't remember the name. There's a North Fork book he did that's like a great coffee table book. And he kind of was like an inspiration when I started. I never actually got to meet him, but I was always like blown away by his photos. And there was a couple years where I just kind of forgot about him. And then 2021 or something, I Googled him to go to his webpage, and the website was taken down. It says like, unavailable or whatever. And then I go back and I search his name, and I see that he passed away, and he was like, 60 years old. He unfortunately passed away from cancer. But it made me realize all of a sudden, it sounds pretentious, but it made me think about legacy. And like, if I were to die and somebody doesn't pay for my website, like most of my photos are gone. Thankfully, somehow his website got relaunched, so I'm glad to see that. But it was like eye-opening moment for me of like, these photos. What is a photo worth if nobody sees it, or like, what happens after I'm gone? And it made me really want to produce a book, because like Jake Raj's legacy is kind of left behind through his books, and I wanted to try and document all the farms. I found myself needing to draw a line, because when you include wineries and sod farms and tree farms and like every type of farm out here, it is a massive amount. So I've trying to like include maybe not every single one, but at least one of every type of farm. And then the legacy farms I'd like to include, like Wickham's. And the idea would be that I'd basically have this book that was all about farming for the North Fork, and my goal is to try and get it published, self-publish it, because I have concerns that if I go to a publisher, that the book it's a niche topic. I don't expect the book about farming on the North Fork to sell very well in Tahoe,
Yeah.
and so like if I'm thinking like, okay, a publisher is probably gonna be like, oh, this book's doing terrible across the country, but doing great in the North Fork. I'm not sure how it works, but that was my thinking at least. And so I wanted to try to self-publish it, but also I wanted to sell it at like farm stands and stuff. That's like my goal. And then the farm stands could maybe get some of the profit, and then a certain percentage, when this book gets done, I want to donate back to the Long Island Farm Bureau. But the idea would be that, yes, it would be a bit of my legacy because I'd be making a book that would forever be there, but it would also be like the legacy of these farms. And again, a lot of these farms are getting bought up and developed into other things. I know zoning and Conic Land Trust, there's people doing great work, but I was seeing this change, and I thought it was important to try to kind of make a time capsule of where it is now, because I've already seen just from 2015, I've already seen so much change in just farming. I'm not even talking about like hotels and restaurants and all that, like just in agriculture. And I've heard countless stories of how difficult it is to farm out here. The cost of living, and the workers for the farms, the migrants, laborers. There's a lot in this to unpack. And originally I said I'd set myself a year goal, and I very quickly realized that this is like could be a 8-year project, not a year project. And especially if I want it to be as like thorough as I had envisioned. And so I'm working on that. And then so like viewing everything as projects really kind of transformed me, like to the point where I really don't want to photograph anything right now unless it fits into one of the categories that I already have. But yeah, anyways.
No, but then you also, in terms of another project you're working on that I've noticed on social media, is Faces of Greenport, and I was curious how that project came about. April last year. So it's been a year. I was on an assignment in Noyac on the South Fork, photographing these garages for the South Forker, and this guy came out. He saw that I had purchased a 4x5 large format film camera. If you don't know what that is, that's like the one where you put the blanket over your head, and it's usually wooden. They're very big and clunky. They've been around for 150 years. So I purchased one of those. I really liked how you have super control. It produces an image unlike anything that digital can do. And it's incredibly high resolution for being film. Like it's actually produces more image data, if you were to talk about it in digital terms, than any digital camera can produce, essentially. And so I was over there photographing it, and it was mostly digital for this project, but I was like, hey, let me pull this out of my car and take a portrait of this garage owner who works on classic cars. And I took it out, and he worked on classic cars, so he immediately appreciated the like historic value of the camera and like the analog side of it, and he just thought it was really neat. And he kind of disappeared in the back of the garage, and there's like
I don't know where it was, a storage room in the back, and he pulls out this box and covered in sawdust, and pulls out a Rolleiflex twin lens reflex camera, and from 1953 is what I've dated it to. And he's like, this is my dad's. I don't use it, but you seem like somebody who could use it and you'd like it. And he wanted to sell it to me for like an exorbitant amount of money. And I'm like, look, it's covered in sawdust. I don't know if this thing works. I'll give you $100. And he said, okay. And I took it home. I cleaned it, lubed it, got it all working. And then I was like, I need to put some film through this. And first thing I did was come to Greenport and futzed around with the camera. It's a very different than your normal camera where you're putting it up to your eye, or it's designed to be viewed from the waist. And so all the photos are taken from a lower perspective. I'm 6'5", and so and this is a huge issue when I take pictures, is that most of my photos are looking down at people unless I like actively crouch or hold my camera lower. Because from my angle, most photos of people or something is not a very flattering angle. And so I really liked that this camera was meant to be shot low. And it's almost like the height of a child, like eyes, like if you were seeing the world through a kid's eyes. That's the way I like to think of it. And I went around town and took photos. I don't even remember if any of them came out, but I was like, this camera it felt in my hands. It felt so good. And I fell hard for that camera. And I then went home and I was like, okay, I need to figure out what I'm doing with this thing. And there's a famous documentary called Finding Vivian Maier.
Yes.
So I watched that, which I had already seen, but I was like, put this on for some inspiration. And she was famous for using a Rolleiflex with her work, and she's got some amazing photos. But it made me realize, okay, this camera is really geared for documenting people, not so much. I mean, you can document whatever you want with it, but it's really meant for people, I felt like. And so I started walking around Greenport once, twice a week, just taking photos of people on the street. It's certainly not New York City street photography, because in 1 minute in New York City, you can have 100 things happen in front of you. In Greenport, you may have to sit there for like 20 minutes till something interesting happens. And very quickly, I realized I was out of my comfort zone. Like I said, I'm an introvert. I do not like approaching strangers. And I was also at the time feeling pretty down about humanity and just the way the world events are happening, whether that's politics or just divisiveness that's happening in society right now. It felt very negative and very dark, and I wanted to try and for my own sake, find something that made me believe in humanity again and believe that this world is better than it's led on to, the news and stuff is portraying it. And so I started walking around Greenport and approaching some people. I know a lot of people in this village, but I'd approach plenty of strangers as well and strike up a conversation with them. One of the first that really stuck with me is Beth. She lives on, I don't know her last name, but she lives over on 6. I think it's 6. One of the cherry blossom roads, And I was out walking down the street, and she was sitting on her porch, and we had I never met her before in my life. We had an hour and a half long conversation on the front of her porch. And I took her picture, and I was I left that interaction, and I felt like butterflies in me. It just felt so authentic and a real human interaction. This wonderful woman who, two strangers can sit there and talk for an hour and a half about all sorts of stuff. She told me all about her life. Fascinating woman. And yeah, gradually it became like, okay, this is making me uncomfortable because I'm approaching strangers, but feel really good afterwards. Like, and then I started posting them on Instagram, and I created a page called Faces of Greenport. And I didn't want, I mean, yes, I'm the photographer, but it's not about me. This is the first time I've taken like this much credit for it. I really like my name's not in any of it. It's on my website, but if you go on Instagram, like there's nowhere does it say Jeremy Garretson or anything like that on Faces of Greenport. So it was a combination of like I was doing this for my own mental well-being, but I also wanted to highlight these positive interactions that are right in our own backyard. And again, I'm viewing this as documenting. Like it's not, yes, it's portraiture, but I'm documenting this moment in time, the people right now in Greenport, and I've done a lot of like looking at my photos of how are they going to be in 20 years from now, 30 years from now, like in a historical context. And so, yeah, I'm like basically trying to take a photographic inventory of the people in Greenport. And they don't have to be locals. It could be tourists visiting and whatever, but it's grown quite well. I mean, I just got over, I think I'm almost 1,100 followers. I mean, I hate social media, but it's grown very organically, and it's probably been the most rewarding thing I've worked on. To touch on the film aspect of it, I don't think these photos would be at all interesting if it wasn't shot on film. There's a nostalgic look to them. They're also tangible. I mean, I have the negatives. I develop everything in my bathroom, so I'm like involved from start to finish. And it's not like you're pushing a button and a bunch of computing's happening. It's like completely analog. And it just felt very real. And especially like I also started shooting film because everybody's talking about AI. And I'm like, they're saying AI is going to replace photography and all these jobs. And it is. It's not going to replace all photography. Like, it's going to replace a bunch of it. And I kind of wanted to push back at that. And I felt like film is like the antithesis of AI. And I kind of wanted to show that, like, everybody's saying AI is amazing. I'm showing that the opposite's amazing. It's kind of part of it. But yeah, I mean, I've spent a fortune on film, that's for sure. It's not cheap. Each roll's like $12 plus, if I were to send it out to get developed, it would be another $10 or $12. And so then you're talking $22 for 10 to 12 shots, which is not economical. So that's why I develop at home. And I've also done a couple with the 4x5 camera I was talking about. That's like more reserved for select people because it involves a lot more setup and time, and it's more expensive. And so, for example, I'm sure a lot of the listeners know Ruth at the IGA. She's a wonderful woman and has a beautiful face that is just meant to be photographed. And she's one of my favorite photos I took. And I mean, it's a 4x5 shot, and if you look at the photo and you just look into her eyes, like it just tells such a story. But I also try to like talk about a little bit of the interaction that happens. Some of the shots are candid and some are more planned, like me saying, hey, do you mind if I take your photo? Hi, I'm Jeremy. Where are you from? What do you whatever. Sometimes I get into asking advice. I'm like, if you have any life advice, what would that be? And I'm trying to find out about these people. And yeah, I mean, it's, like I said, it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done as far as photography goes. And I don't plan on stopping. I do want to have a show at some point. I want it to be a public space, and I want it to be a show that, Patel at Mr. Roberts would come to, or I don't want it to be a snooty art show. I want it to be like in a public space where everybody feels welcome to come see themselves, hopefully themselves. I honestly would love to have a photo of every single person, but that's a huge project. But yeah, I mean,
would you think about even doing a book?
Yeah,
as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I want to give all the photos at some point to the Sterling Historical Society. And again, thinking about it in historical context, like some year, like 20 years from now, 40, 50, 100, they're going to look back and see this snapshot of Greenport and what it was like in the 2020s. And the show, I mean, it's not economical for me to print a bunch of high-end framed pieces for the number of photos we're talking. I'm thinking of just having it being like immersive experience with tons of small photos of all the people, and I want it to be like interactive, like all these people are staring back at you, and like I want it to be a large number of photos where you're taken back by it. That's the goal. I've spoken to Kevin, the mayor, about it, spoken to a few people about it. Funding is definitely going to be a concern. It's not community service what I'm doing, but at the same time, like, I'm not putting on a show to make money from this. This project is, again, about the people here, not about me. But yeah.
And then just a little bit on because I thought that was interesting because we have seen a lot of change recently with AI and people using that more so now, and it's easier for people to type and say, oh, I want a portrait of this person, and you can still, I mean, right now we can still tell the difference. It's really but I think overall, even it could be even said for even in film, and it is, you get more of a hands-on, almost, not that it's like a imperfection, but just a natural quality that is still lacking, and I still think it's a great process. It is a lot of time and it costs a lot of money for the material, but it is kind of like a labor of love to really put the time into each individual image instead of just like, oh, I want to do something really quick and snapshot.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, AI may replace your LinkedIn headshot. Sure. But is it going to replace your wedding photographer, or, when your grandmother wants a family picture? Like, no, there's still going to be photographers. I think people right now in this day and age are longing for authenticity. And I think photography does that. A lot of it does that. But analog is really as authentic as you can get. The vinyl's making a comeback, for example. So, I mean, people are liking this nostalgic, authentic, analog, mechanical, whatever you want to call it. I think it's making a movement, and if it's not, I like it. So
yeah, I mean, personally, for me, I'm still more of a physical, hands-on touching, and I get the convenience of just, even if, say, we look at just books and audiobooks and ebooks, I still personally like reading a physical book, but
it's a better experience. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then also, in terms of this project, when you were initially thinking of the project, Greenport was your main focus. Have you looked at, say, I mean, it probably, Greenport is a good in terms of its layout and walking around. Have you thought about Orient or East Marion or Southold?
Well, so yeah, I have thought like, okay, maybe in the future this is going to expand to other hamlets, villages, whatever. The Greenport is definitely easy because of the layout. Like you can walk around it the most. You're going to find more people on the street. So I mean, I kind of, some of this is street photography, some of it is portraiture. Kind of call it street portraiture. But you know, I like this winter, for example, I kind of went through a hiatus on Faces of Greenport because I was coming into town and I wasn't seeing anybody. Like everybody was inside, and like I kind of, most of these shots are done on the sidewalk, which then got me thinking like, okay, I want to start doing more planned shoots, like not just rely on running into people, like finding an interesting person, saying, okay, I want to photograph them in their homes, for example, in their environment. And yeah, I mean, I haven't done too much of that yet, but that's definitely the direction I want to go in. You know, I'm trying to tell a story for like these individuals. You know, there's the people I've met through this has been like the best part. Guy, Chris, I don't know his last name, but he rides his bike around town like constantly. He's tall, like probably 6'5", skinny, tall guy. Always has like the biker bandana on or something. And you know, I've always wanted to get his photo, and he's always cruising by, and I always miss it. And I finally like stopped him and I asked, and he was another person that we ended up having like a 45-minute conversation with on the corner of Front and Main. But you know, he told me like his life story and a lot of his hardships that he's been through, and how he's like, and he's 60 something years old now, and he's like in the best health of his life, and like he feels like he only just started living like in the last couple of years. And I'm like, that is amazing to hear. I'm like, yeah, that it really has brought up my faith in people, and that, you know, we're a lot more alike than we are different, and that we all share and cohabitate this place together. So yeah. And then just one other thing about the project, I've noticed that it is nice. I mean, the spontaneity of that, even like you said, you're an introvert, but it can be challenging at times, really going up to people. But I think even the photos seem very just natural. I don't know if when you decide to take the photo, or if it takes a bit of time. Yeah, I mean, it's about 90% natural. And I think the camera is also, it's a medium format film camera, not 35 millimeter. I should have said that. So it's like a much bigger negative you're getting, and that kind of gives a more realistic perspective. It's the perspective of medium format looks more what we see with our eyes than 35 millimeter does, as far as like how the subject is in space, like and you know, I think that's part of it. I think that, you know, there's I go up to people and I'm like, I try to find something about them that I find interesting, you know. So if there's a photo on there of these two women who are, you know, probably 60 or so, and they've been friends forever, and they were visiting Greenport, and they were wearing matching blouses, and I go up to them to help break the ice. I'm like, I love your guys' shirts, you know, would you mind if I take your photo? And as opposed to just going up and like, do you mind if I take your photo? You need to give them something as to why, or like what interests you about them, or, and I mean, I've told people, I'm like, you have a fascinating face, or like, whatever it is, you know, Some of it though is more candid. There's a photo of a little girl sitting down like the alleyway next to the post office, and she looks like she's by herself sitting next to a puddle. Like, why is this girl like sitting on this dirty like pavement by herself? And her mom was right behind me, and whatever. But like, so you also get those like candid moments that make you like wonder what the heck's going on here. But yeah, the vast majority of them are staged. I feel a lot more comfortable asking somebody's permission than it's not violating their space. But like, I don't want to make anybody look bad. That's the thing. Like, if I take a photo of somebody doing in a vulnerable moment and I make them look bad and post it, then that's not what this is about,
Yeah. And I know you mentioned the book about the North Fork Farms, and you mentioned possibly the Faces of Greenport, or you're continuing to work on that as well as doing freelance work for the Suffolk Times. And are there any other projects that you are working on or have planned?
First, let me just say, if I just gotta make a quick Faces of Greenport comment. Anybody who's listening,
Sure.
if you know somebody that you think, you can't nominate yourself, but if you know somebody in Greenport that you think would be a good candidate for Faces of Greenport, please message me, or you can email me on my website, jeremygarretson.com, or on Instagram on Faces of Greenport. I'm looking for more women. For some reason, this is totally subconscious to me, but I guess that when I'm approaching people, I find it easier to approach men. I looked at the images, and I'm like, why are there so many men? I didn't realize it at the time.
Just like a natural thing.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know why. But yeah, I'm looking for people to photograph, and I'm open to any suggestions as long as it's not yourself. But yeah, other projects. Another one I'm working on is I call it the last of the bungalows. But it's basically I find my dad was an architect, as I mentioned. So I'm interested in buildings and structures, and I find these little bungalows, like these 1950s Sears houses that you could buy in a magazine. The one on, Beach Street, or Breezy Shores and Southold. But just these small homes that are built really close to the water, and a lot of them aren't insulated, just summer homes pretty much. While I don't have as big of a collection as I want, I've probably only got like 10 photos so far. I want to document the bungalows on the North Fork, because like a lot of them are either at some point going to get developed, or a storm's going to take them away because they're right on the beach or something like that. And once the storm takes it away, it's not like somebody's going to build another bungalow. They're going to build a bigger house.
Yes.
That movement of there was like a vacation movement in the mid 1900s or whatever. People leaving the cities. Those little bungalows were perfect. You could have a family of like 7 people in a tiny house, but that's all you needed. You were on vacation.
Yeah.
And that's not like that today. So I'm actively looking to photograph bungalows and beach houses that are on the water. It's kind of harder to include ones that aren't that are inland more. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I think that's all really important for documenting, especially, I don't know, it just seems like in terms of the North Fork, things have really ramped up since COVID. Yeah, things have kind of ramped up.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really important to at least document that, because I think we've seen a lot of things. Even we went through some periods even in the 50s and 60s where there was a lot of demolition of older buildings, and just being more appreciative, or at least documenting that history, is important so people at least understand what was there. And it wasn't just an empty parking lot.
Yeah, I mean, everybody uses the Hamptons reference, you know, and do I see that happening on the North Fork? Quite possibly, but I feel like it's I'm obligated to, at least through photographs, try to show that that's not what this place is. And you know, I don't. And I may have other projects down the line, but they're probably going to fall under that umbrella as well. I just really think it's important to show the difference of what 10 years makes. And I mean, I have like a dozen barns in my photography portfolio that aren't there anymore, and I just think that's interesting. You know, there's a barn in Mattituck on 25 across from the BP gas station that's there. I think it's BP, maybe Hess. There's a kind of iconic North Fork barn, and I didn't know this, but the second story of it used to be the second schoolhouse in Mattituck. And like, you know, I've taken photos of this barn over the years a bunch of times, and it wasn't until I picked up, I can't remember her name, but this book, and it said that it used to be the schoolhouse. And I'm like, that is fascinating. I'm like, nobody knows that out here. It's not common. I mean, I'm sure people do, but it's not like something most people know. And I just thought, in a historical context, that's very interesting. And then I'm thinking, like, how can I apply that historical context to my photos and show change? I mean, that's obviously not a schoolhouse anymore. It's a barn, potato barn, but yeah.
No, and with your time living out here and working out here, what do you enjoy the most about living and working on the North Fork?
The community is pretty cool out here. They can be very supportive, not just for me, but for anybody, when they want to be. And I mean, I love the light out here. We get great light, especially in September. It's like you get the long shadows. And I mean, summers are great. I mean, the seasons are just great. I love, you know, the farm to table thing. Yeah, I mean, it's a great place to live. I love being on the water still. I still get on a boat whenever I can. You know, yeah, I mean, there's another project I'm kind of kicking around that would be similar to the farm project, but about the maritime nautical side of the North Fork, because I mean, it's kind of like the other backbone out here. And you know, maybe cover the oyster farmers, the fishermen, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I love it out here, and I hope my photos show just how much I love every aspect of out here, because I'm trying to show the people that I love out here, the land I love out here, yeah.
And we also touched a little bit on some of the changes and what might appear down the line for the North Fork, but what do you hope for the future of Greenport and its community down the line?
Okay. Without trying to piss people off, one thing I'm seeing a lot of is corporations that aren't based on the North Fork buying things out here, whether that's farmland or hotels or restaurants, like hospitality businesses. And a lot of them come here thinking that they're gonna improve what is there, or thinking that they're solving a problem that doesn't exist. And I hope that those organizations realize the importance of the community out here and keep them involved with every decision they make, and not just think about the dollars and the profits. Obviously, the cost of living is very high out here, and I have a 21-year-old, just turned 21-year-old stepdaughter and a 14-year-old son, and I want them to be able to live out here. Do I tell them they're going to be able to live out here? I kind of say you should expect not to, just because they're going to have to work really hard to make it out here. And so, I mean, I really hope the community stays tight and supportive of one another, and I hope that nobody feels like they aren't welcome here anymore because of cost of living or the change of people or whatever it is. I mean, there's so much family. People have, not me, I'm not a North Fork native, but I know so many people with like generations of people that have been out here, and I just hope those people continue to stay here because I think they're an invaluable part of our community. I'm not going to name any names, but I mean, sure we all know, people like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then is there anything else you'd like to discuss or say that we haven't talked about? Or?
I mean, no, I can't really think of much. I mean, it was a great conversation. Yeah. I mean, I'm a shameless self-promotion, sure. But if you want to see any of my work, please go to jeremygarretson.com. About, I don't know, third to half of my income comes from selling my art, and the other half comes from freelance. And I love working on all sorts of projects. Like I said, I don't like titles, so I mean, architecture to people to landscapes, but I'd love to, and I love working with local businesses. So if I can ever be of any service, please reach out to
support local artists and people in the community. But no, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come in today and tell your story, and it was really nice talking to you about your artwork and the process of some of these projects that have come to fruition. And I think it really is important work that you're doing in terms of capturing and finding people in the community. And I think it is really an important part with the idea of society today and really bringing people together and interacting with people in the community with stories and putting faces to the people and really documenting that for today and future generation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly not the first person to go out and document their hometown. I do think I think it's unique because the camera I'm choosing to use mixed with, like, there's a Faces of Long Island, for example. It's a little different. It's there to highlight business owners and stuff like that. This is a very small village that I've chose to do this in. So, sometimes it's hard to find new people. So, but giving myself this small area as my boundary and where I can do this has been really fun. Allow me to be hyper focused, and I'm now super observant. One thing that's come out of that is I'm always watching people now, and little things waiting for a kid who's eating ice cream for the ice cream to fall on the ground because it looks like it's about to, and then just being patient and watching and observing. And I think everybody should observe more, just around your people. Watch interactions, watch little things.
Yeah, because that's another thing about today, just a lot of people are more focused on their screen and aren't interacting with other people and when even just walking around the community. So I think that's...
Yeah, the irony of social media is that it's you're not being social.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, so thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you, Chris.
in.
This was great. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 56 with Jeremy Garretson. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.